I woke up to the sound of screaming. Not just any screaming. Karen screaming. You know the type. Loud, shrill, filled with pure rage. I rolled out of bed, rubbed my eyes, and stepped outside to see what fresh disaster awaited me today. And there it was, the most glorious sight I had ever seen. Karen, standing in my driveway, face twisted in a mix of fury and confusion. Her shiny luxury SUV sat stranded, completely stuck, inside a deep trench that I had legally built. The wheels dangled helplessly over the edge. She stomped around, waving her arms like she was trying to cast a curse on me. She locked eyes with me and went ballistic. "What have you done? This is illegal." I took a sip of my coffee. "Actually, it's not." Her face turned 3 different shades of red. The best part? I could raise and lower the drawbridge at will. Right now it was up, which meant she wasn't going anywhere. She started screeching again, threatening to call the police, the HOA, the mayor, anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, I just stood there, soaking in the moment. 2 weeks ago, none of this would have made sense, but 2 weeks ago, Karen hadn't declared war on my driveway. I wasn't asking for much. Just a quiet life, grilling some steaks on the weekend, maybe enjoying a beer on my porch. That was the dream. But in this neighborhood, peace was impossible. Not with Karen in charge. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the HOA president, and she treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. If you so much as breathed the wrong way, she had a problem with it. She was the type of person who measured people's grass with a ruler to make sure it was within regulations, issued fines over nonsense, like my trash can being out 10 minutes past pickup time, sent emails dripping with passive-aggressive concern about maintaining community standards. Everyone hated her, but no one dared to fight back. She had the HOA board wrapped around her finger and used the rules like a weapon. I had dealt with her before, annoying, petty stuff, but nothing major. That was until she made it personal. The day Karen declared war. It started like any other morning. I walked outside, coffee in hand, ready to start the day. But the moment I stepped onto my porch, I froze. Karen's oversized luxury SUV was parked right across my driveway, completely blocking it. At first, I thought maybe she had just stopped for a second. Maybe she was dropping something off. I stepped closer. Nope. There she was, standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, smug as ever. "Morning, Karen," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Your car's blocking my driveway." She smiled like she had planned this for weeks. "Oh, I know," she said sweetly. I frowned. "So, you're gonna move it, right?" Her grin widened. "Actually, no. We've had some complaints about your driveway." I blinked. "Complaints? From who?" "That's confidential," she said, waving her hand like I was a child asking too many questions. "But the HOA board has decided your driveway doesn't comply with community standards." That made 0 sense. My driveway was a normal, boring concrete slab. There was nothing wrong with it. "Karen, this is ridiculous. You can't just—" She cut me off, pulling out a clipboard. "Until we conduct a full review, I'll be keeping my car here to prevent further violations." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. She wasn't joking. "Karen, you can't do this." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and just so you know, if you try to tow it, that'll be considered harassment. HOA rules." I wanted to scream. I wanted to argue. But I knew Karen. She thrived on confrontation. She wanted me to lose my temper so she could fine me into oblivion. So I took a deep breath, nodded, and walked back inside. Fine. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I'd play smart. I tried to be reasonable. I really did. First, I called the HOA. Maybe, just maybe, There was some logical explanation for this mess. Maybe Karen had twisted some obscure rule, and someone else on the board would see how ridiculous this was. Nope. Radio silence. They didn't care, or worse, they were scared of her. Fine. I tried the next best thing. I called a tow company, told them a random car was blocking my driveway. The guy on the phone was all ready to send a truck over, until I mentioned it was an HOA president's car. That's when he suddenly changed his tune. Yeah, sorry. We can't get involved in neighborhood disputes. Seriously? At this point, I was desperate. I started digging through city regulations, hoping to find something that would get her car off my property. But then I found the worst loophole imaginable. HOAs could enforce parking rules on private property if they claimed it was for community standards. Karen had me boxed in, and she knew it. The fines start rolling in. I could have dealt with the car. I could have waited it out, hoping she'd eventually get bored. But Karen wasn't done. She wanted me crushed. It started with a letter in my mailbox. An official HOA notice. Violation. Failure to maintain driveway penalty. $100 fine. I read it twice. Failure to maintain? The only reason I wasn't using my driveway was because her SUV was blocking it. The next day, another letter. Violation. Unauthorized modifications to property penalty. $200 fine. I hadn't modified a thing. My house looked the exact same as it did last week. But apparently, existing while annoying Karen counted as an unauthorized modification. By the end of the week, I had 5 separate fines sitting on my kitchen counter. Meanwhile, Karen was walking around like she had just won the lottery. She made sure to linger outside my house, sipping her overpriced iced coffee, flashing that smug little smile every time I stepped outside. I could see it in her eyes. She thought she had beaten me. She had no idea what was coming next. I could have stayed angry. I could have kept banging my head against the wall, watching the fines stack up while Karen pranced around like she owned the entire neighborhood. But that's not how I operate. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I'd play smart. So I spent my nights researching. Not just scrolling random forums, I dug deep into zoning laws, city codes, and legal loopholes that the HOA might have overlooked. After hours of reading through the most boring documents known to mankind, I found it, one perfect sentence buried in the local zoning regulations. Temporary security structures on private property are not subject to HOA restrictions. Security structures. Security. A driveway counts as private property, and nowhere did it say what kind of security structure was allowed. Oh, I was about to secure the hell out of my driveway. Operation. Trench begins. The next morning, I made some calls, found a local equipment rental place and got myself an excavator, hired a couple of guys who didn't ask questions as long as the money was good. By the afternoon, the work had started. We dug a 4-foot deep trench all the way around my driveway. Not a little ditch, a full-on medieval-style moat. One of the workers finally broke the silence. "Dude, are you building a moat?" I smiled. Yes. Yes, I am. We worked fast. By sunset, my driveway was completely surrounded by a trench so wide that no car could possibly cross it. And Karen's SUV, right in the middle. Trapped. Karen's meltdown, a live performance. The next morning, I didn't even need an alarm. Karen's screams did the job just fine. I strolled outside, coffee in hand, just in time to see her losing her mind. Face red, hands flailing, voice hitting octaves that probably shattered glass. "What the hell is this?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Oh, just some security modifications. Totally legal." Her eyes nearly popped out of her skull. She pointed a shaking finger at the trench, at her completely stranded SUV. "You can't do this." I pulled out my printed zoning laws and handed them to her like a customer service rep with a return policy. Actually, I can. See this section here? Temporary security structures. City approved. Filed the permit myself. Karen's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Karen.exe had stopped working. Karen tries to fight back, but fails. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. If she couldn't win through the HOA, she'd find another way to make my life miserable. First, she called the city inspectors. I saw them pull up in their little white truck, clipboards in hand. She was standing there with her usual smug look, arms crossed, waiting for them to shut me down. Except, they didn't. I had every permit, every form, every legal requirement covered. The inspectors looked at my trench, looked at Karen, then told her, "Yeah, this is fine. She didn't take that well." Next, she tried a neighborhood petition. She went door to door, ranting about how my monstrosity was ruining property values. Only one problem. Most people in the neighborhood hated her. Some of them even thanked me. The best part? She tried to block my contractors from finishing the job, but she made a huge mistake. Turns out one of the guys working on my property was the city councilman's brother. He didn't just ignore her complaints. He laughed in her face. Leveling up. The Drawbridge. At this point, the trench was great. It kept Karen out. It kept her SUV stranded, but something was missing. If I was going to go this far, I had to go all the way. So, I built a drawbridge. I got wood, hinges, pulleys, spent hours making sure it could actually lift and lower like a real medieval fortress. And of course, I documented the whole thing. Set up a camera. Filmed every step. Because, come on, this was internet gold. Finally, after some trial and error, the drawbridge was done. Time for the test run. I grabbed the rope, pulled, and like magic, the drawbridge lifted. Karen's reaction, again. I didn't even need to call her over. She was always watching. As soon as she saw me raising the drawbridge, she lost it. "You can't have a medieval fortress in the suburbs." Oh, but I could. I gave her a little wave, pulled the rope again. The bridge lifted. The HOA war was over, and I had won. Karen's midnight sabotage attempt. Karen wasn't done yet. She had lost every battle so far, but instead of giving up, she did what every unhinged HOA tyrant does. She got desperate. One night, around midnight, my security cameras caught her sneaking into my yard, hood up, flashlight in hand, and, oh yeah, a pair of bolt cutters. I watched the footage later, and it was like something straight out of a bad crime show. She tiptoed up to my drawbridge, looked around like she was in a spy movie, and then tried to cut the ropes. Except, she didn't realize two things. I had reinforced the ropes. They weren't just some cheap hardware store cords. They were thick, industrial-strength cables. She was on camera, multiple angles, full HD dot. She kept sawing away, getting more frustrated by the second until she finally gave up. But not before tripping over my flower bed and landing face first in the dirt. At that point, I had seen enough. I called the police. The final HOA meeting. Karen gets exposed. You'd think getting caught breaking and entering would be the end of it, but no. Karen decided to double down one last time. She called for an emergency HOA meeting. Her plan? Rally what little support she had left and force the board to shut me down once and for all. I showed up. Calm. Smiling. Waiting for the right moment. Karen went on her usual rant about property values and community standards. She pointed at me like I was some kind of criminal. Then I pulled out a folder. Inside? Everything. Falsified fines she issued to me and my neighbors. Evidence of her embezzling HOA funds. Turns out she had been paying herself bonuses for years. Multiple complaints from homeowners about her threats and intimidation tactics. I stood up, walked to the front of the room, and placed the folder on the table. "Before you decide anything," I said, "you all might want to look at this." Silence. The board members flipped through the papers. Karen turned pale. Within minutes, they called for a vote. Karen was out. She tried to argue, but nobody cared. She was finished. And just like that, the HOA crumbled. No more Karen. No more ridiculous fines. Just peace. And my beautiful, fully legal Drawbridge. Karen is forced to sell her house. With the HOA gone and her power stripped away, Karen had nothing left. Her control, her influence, her ability to terrorize the neighborhood. It was all gone. And to make things worse for her, nobody wanted to live next to her. Her reputation was so bad that every potential buyer either backed out or offered way less than her asking price. She tried to act like she was leaving by choice, but everyone knew the truth. One morning, I stood on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee and watched her moving truck pull away. No more Karen. No more HOA nonsense. Just peace and quiet. The neighborhood is free. With Karen gone, the HOA completely fell apart. Nobody wanted to take over, and honestly, nobody needed it. Neighbors started talking to each other again. No more secret complaints. No more passive-aggressive emails about trash cans. People actually smiled now. One guy even shook my hand and said, "You're a legend, man. The kids in the neighborhood gave my house a nickname, Castle Jake. Every time I saw a group of them pointing at my driveway, I knew they were talking about the drawbridge. Even the mailman thought it was cool. The drawbridge stays." Of course, I kept the drawbridge. After all the trouble I went through, it was a symbol. So I installed a plaque right next to it. It read, "In memory of HOA tyranny." One of my neighbors stopped by, read it, and just shook his head, laughing. "I always knew someone would take her down," he said. "Never thought it'd be with a drawbridge." Honestly? Me neither. But sometimes, when you're dealing with someone like Karen, you have to get creative.